I'm a doctor, and I'm constantly at the hospital working day and night. Honestly, I see strange things all the time and have to shrug it off and keep working. But there was one experience that will always haunt me. If you asked me publicly if I believe in anything that hasn't already been proven with science, I'd say no. But there was one thing, something that's deeply confused me. I was checking on a patient who was experiencing chronic headaches. She kept chanting that they were in control. I had the nurse administer her some pain meds and recommended she be sent to the psych ward. She had no opposition to her recommended treatment, but was adamant that she didn't want to be left alone. When I asked her who they were, she told me that they were reptile demons and that they were going to harvest her soul if she wasn't careful. She said that they had been tormenting her for years and that she had been trying to fight them off, but they were too strong. I tried to comfort her and assure her that we'd take care of her, but she pleaded with me to not leave her alone. I spoke with the nurses, and we decided to keep a close eye on her and have someone always stay close to her. We also increased her pain medication to help ease her symptoms. I kept in touch with her over the next few days, and she seemed to be improving a lot. She wasn't as agitated and was starting to relax a bit. The nurses reported that she hadn't been having any strange or out-of-the-ordinary hallucinations recently. She even started to develop some relationships with some of the other patients in the psych ward. It's possible that whatever was causing her headaches was also causing the hallucinations, but without further testing, we couldn't say for sure. I advised her to continue taking the pain medication and to let the nurse know if she started experiencing any more hallucinations or if her headaches worsened. One day, as I was walking by her room, I saw these menacing shadows on the wall next to her bed. I stopped dead in my tracks and walked backwards to confirm what I was seeing. What I saw next still gives me chills to this day. A lizard creature looked me right in the eyes. It was almost 7 feet tall, and its skin looked scaly and shiny. It had huge claws and these yellow, cat-like eyes that seemed to pierce my soul. I tried to run, but it felt like my feet were glued to the floor. The last thing I remember before passing out was its forked tongue flicking in and out of its mouth. When I came to, the nurses were gathered around my bed with concerned looks on their faces. They asked me what happened, and all I could do was tell them to check on that patient's room. A security guard later explained to me that the patient was nowhere to be found, and her sheets were ripped to pieces and covered in blood. We never saw or heard from that patient again, and we had to call her family and explain that she had left the building and we were actively looking for her. To this day, the family is still searching for her, but my intuition tells me that nobody will ever see her again. Did the reptile demons succeed in harvesting her soul? The skeptic in me wants to say that she lost her mind, scratched herself furiously, ran out of the hospital, and killed herself somewhere. But my intuition tells me that the reality is downright unexplainable. I keep trying to tell myself that I simply saw the reptile demon because my patient had mentioned it earlier and I hallucinated. I kept trying to tell myself that I worked too many hours and saw some things that weren't there and collapsed from exhaustion. That's just not how I experienced it, and I can still make out every detail of the lizard creature. I haven't even told my wife that this happened to me, and I really thought I was going to take this experience to my grave. Do I think there are aliens out there, a Bigfoot in the woods, and an afterlife? I still say no, as there's insufficient evidence for all of the above. Do I think lizard people are roaming around pulling the government's strings? Absolutely not. It simply sounds too absurd and made up. Do reptilians exist in any capacity? No. The only reptiles are simply that, reptiles. Did I see a lizard creature in my patient's room? Undeniably yes. That's why it bothers me so much even today. Everything I know and believe tells me that what I saw, I shouldn't have seen. But I remember it like it was yesterday, and now, when people share their paranormal experiences, my ears perk up. I feel it's necessary to say that I'm not on any medication and wasn't on any at the time of my encounter with what my patient referred to as a reptile demon. I hadn't seen anything like that before this event, and haven't seen anything out of the ordinary since. I don't expect to see anything this strange ever again, but the hospital has never felt the same to me since. My patients are always sharing the craziest stories with me of what goes on in their rooms, and I want to share my experience with them and let them know they aren't crazy. I never will, though. If I was in the hospital and my doctor said he saw a 7-foot lizard creature in my room, I wouldn't hesitate to find another doctor. Maybe someday we'll be able to share our personal experiences and not live in fear of what others might think. I was a volunteer firefighter when those really bad wildfires hit in Northern California. I'm actually from Idaho, but they flew me and some of my friends down there to help out because the blaze was so out of control. It's just unimaginable destruction and made me really sad to see all the homes and neighborhoods totally destroyed. They had us camping a good distance away from any of the fires, and every night someone was on watch and radio. We were always on high alert because with the change of the wind, miles could easily turn into minutes. I had been there for a week, maybe a week and a half. We had just pulled a 15 or 16-hour day and were finishing up dinner, so probably close to 11 or 12 at night. This guy Casey comes running over and tells us to follow him to the back of camp. I mean back of camp is generous because that group had maybe 25 or 30 tents. We followed him over to near the train tracks and he was yelling about a weird sound he'd heard while taking a smoke. I couldn't hear anything and neither could anyone else, but Casey was never like this. He was super chill and never made a big deal about anything. I think he was an English teacher or something at one point. I didn't know him super well, I'd only worked with him once before. He ran down the tracks. It was getting dark, but the fires were keeping it somewhat light out, so you could still sort of see what was happening. There was an overall glow to the situation. Casey had a pretty big head start on us, and we soon lost him in some trees up ahead. It was sometime right around then when the wind decided to change. The fire got to us quickly. But you see, the thing is, the fire was there way too fast. It should have taken an hour at least to make the distance that it did, but somehow, all of a sudden, everything was blazing. The trees, the grass, the wood of the railroad tracks. I saw that the metal of the railroad tracks was also on fire. None of this was normal. Everything was happening too fast. We were surrounded on every side by walls of fire, and it was closing in on us. I looked up and the flames were above us too. I thought I was imagining it at first, then Nancy, one of the ladies on the team, started yelling through the roar of the fire. "Do you hear that?" It was a strange cross between a hiss and a hum. It was deep and at the same time high-pitched. I could feel it under my skin. The fire brightened up where Casey had disappeared. The ground began to rumble and I realized the hiss was coming from below. A giant sort of fireball exploded upwards in front of us. The fire around us grew lower, except for in front of us, where it grew even brighter. I saw what looked like the outline of a person deep in the fire. I thought it was Casey. But the closer I looked, the stranger it appeared. It was hard to tell, but it was probably 7 or 8 feet tall. There was no way someone could withstand that heat either. It was impossible. The shrieky humming grew louder, and I realized the creature was running towards us. Its front limbs were long, swinging until it got closer, and then it felt like it was reaching. I dove out of the way. The flames were trailing with it. Could have been the source of the fire. The second before I blacked out, I rolled over and got a glimpse of its legs, which looked like the hind legs of an animal. Maybe a horse or a goat or something like that. I woke up and I didn't know how long I'd been out, but it must have been a while because it was starting to get light out, and not just from the nearby wildfires. The sun was coming up and I could see I wasn't the only one who passed out. Nancy and some of the guys were nearby on the ground too. I checked on them all and they were all alive and breathing, but still out. I looked around and saw a giant hole where part of the railroad track had been. Some of the metal had sort of melted and dripped down the side of the hole. It looked like icicles. I went to the edge of the hole, which was more like a pit, probably at least 10 or 15 feet deep. The sides of it were caked in ash. Turning around, I realized that nothing had actually been burned. The track had melted a bit. A few feet on either side of the pit were a little charred, but everything else was unburnt. Green grass and weeds. Trees were still covered in needles, and the trunks were untouched. There was also a stripe, or maybe a path, of grass that had been kind of crisp. It went from the pit to over the hill in the direction of the wildfires. Once everyone woke up and determined no one was too badly hurt, we searched for 3 or 4 hours. Couldn't find any sign of Casey. I'm not sure what we saw, but we all saw it. I've been a police officer for about 3 years, and already I could write a book on some of the experiences I've had. I have to tell you about this crazy call I responded to that I could only describe as paranormal. I got a call in about a man who claimed that someone was breaking into his house, so I turned around and headed to his address. He lived in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by woods for miles. If someone was breaking into this guy's house, it was someone who knew him well. I got out of the car and started looking around. The windows of the house were broken and the door was busted in. I pulled out my gun and yelled, "Police, come out with your hands up." Thank God," a man screamed. "It almost got me." This was clearly the owner of the house, an elderly gentleman who was shaking in fear. I asked him if there was anyone else in the house, and he told me he was alone. I asked if the burglars were still around, and he said it was no burglar. "The demon! It almost got me!" I told him to wait in the patrol car where it was safe, and I started looking around the house. I checked every room in the house and didn't see any signs of anyone still there. I circled the outside of the house and looked around. All of the doors and windows were bashed in, but I didn't see any evidence of the criminals still being around. I asked the old man to get out of the patrol car and we sat down outside. I told him to take deep breaths and calm himself down. I told him the calmer and clearer he was, the better I could help him find the criminal responsible. The man laughed at me and said it was no criminal. "The demon will keep trying, but he'll never take me alive." I asked him what he meant. He said that a demon lived in the woods behind his house. He would see him poke his head out from the trees from time to time and disappear back into the woods. Then the demon got braver and would look through the windows until the old man saw him, and he'd run back off into the woods. He only recently started trying to attack the old man, and this time was the closest he got. The old man described the demon as having pale white skin with large black eyes and a huge mouth. He said it was skinny and tall, and it ran on all fours like a dog. I didn't know how to take this. The man was pretty old, and I doubted he had the capability to bash the windows and doors in himself. He didn't seem crazy, but the demon he was describing couldn't possibly be true. Could it? The way I saw it, someone tried to hurt the old man, and maybe it was dark, so he thought he saw a demon. When someone's under that kind of stress, they often recall details inaccurately, and that could be the case here. It could also be somebody wearing some sort of mask to disguise their identity. Either way, I didn't feel good about leaving the old man alone to be attacked again. I asked him if there was someplace else he could stay, and he refused to leave. "I'm going to be the one to shoot this demon," the man said. "I want to be there when the life leaves his eyes. My face will be the last thing he'll ever see." I didn't want to leave the man, but I got another call that I had to respond to. I checked up on the man about a week later, and he had his windows and doors replaced and seemed to be in a pretty good headspace. One night, I responded to a call about someone trying to break into a house. When I looked at the address, it was the same as the old man's. I turned on my lights and siren and sped there as quickly as I could. When I arrived on scene, the windows were bashed in again and the door was kicked in. I pulled out my gun and shouted, "Police, come out with your hands up!" There was no response. I called for the old man several times and got no response. I walked into the house and started looking around. The door to the bedroom was kicked in, and a trail of blood went from the bedroom out the back door. I followed the trail, and it was clear a body was dragged out into the woods. I called for backup. I wasn't about to head into the woods with a murderer by myself. The backup arrived, and we searched all night. Couldn't find the old man anywhere. That morning, we found him, several miles into the woods, with huge bite marks all over his body. Someone, or something, feasted on the old man. The officers talked about the cannibal in the woods, but I was starting to believe the old man's story. This thing attacked the poor man several times and ate him. I'm not saying that humans aren't capable of cannibalism. After everything I've seen, I can tell you that humans are capable of unspeakable things. But the old man described this creature vividly and saw him on multiple occasions. I feel responsible for his death, and I can't let it go. I can't imagine going out that way, being eaten to death. Nobody deserves that, especially not that old man.